I worked the closing shift at a home improvement store for almost 2 years, the kind of place with 12 aisles of lumber and a garden center out back. By the end, I could lock up in my sleep. There were 19 cameras in that building. I had counted them once out of boredom on a slow Tuesday. The night everything changed, only 18 were working. I didn't notice that until much later. Let me back up. The store sat off a highway exit between a tire shop and a closed-down diner. Most nights we got maybe 40 customers after 8. I was a key holder, which meant I stayed until the registers were counted and the doors were chained. It paid $2 more an hour. That was the only reason I did it. Closing was a routine. You learn a building at night. You learn which lights buzz, which freezer hums, which floor tile clicks under a cart. I knew all of it. I could tell you what the store sounded like empty and what it sounded like with one customer left in plumbing. The first thing I noticed that night was small. I almost didn't write it down later, but I did. At 9:14, the overhead music cut out for about 4 seconds, then came back. That happened sometimes. The system was old. I figured a breaker hiccuped or someone in the back bumped the panel. I went back to facing shelves in aisle 7. I didn't think about it again for hours. We closed at 10. At 9:50 I did my first walk. That's where you sweep the store and tell stragglers we're closing soon. I had a coworker named Dell that night, an older guy who ran the registers. He was up front. I took the back half. The back of the store is mostly tall racking, lumber, drywall, insulation. The lights up there are motion triggered to save power. You walk in, they snap on above you in a wave. You walk out, they go dark behind you after a minute. When I came into aisle 11, the lights were already on. I told myself a customer had just been there. That's the obvious answer. Lights stay on for 60 seconds. I just missed someone walking out the other end. I even called out, "We're closing in 10. Nobody answered. The aisle was empty. I moved on. I want to be clear about something. None of this felt scary yet. It felt like a normal night with a couple of normal hiccups. That's how it works. You don't get scared all at once. You get there one reasonable explanation at a time. I finished my sweep and found nobody. Dell said he'd already cashed out the last customer at 9:40, a guy buying paint rollers, so the store should have been empty behind me when those lights were on. I decided the motion sensor was glitching. They did that. I made a note to tell maintenance. Then I went up front to help Dell close the registers. At 10:05, we locked the front sliding doors and pulled the chain across. This is the part people don't understand about big stores. Once those doors are locked, there is no easy way in. The garden center gate is padlocked. The receiving dock is a steel roll-up door. We were sealed in. That's supposed to feel safe. Dell left at 10:20 through the employee door on the side. You badge out, the door locks behind you. I watched him pull out of the lot. Then it was just me, the count, and 18 working cameras I didn't yet know were 18. I sat in the cash office counting drawers. It's a small room with one door and a window that looks out over the front registers. The count takes about 30 minutes. I had a lukewarm gas station coffee and a podcast playing on one earbud only. That was store policy, so you could still hear the floor. At 10:41, I heard a cart move. Not roll exactly, more like the specific rattle a cart makes when someone bumps it and it shifts a foot, then stops. It came from the front lanes, maybe 40 feet away on the other side of the office window. I looked up. I could see all the registers from there. Every lane was empty. The cart corral by lane 1 was full and still. I told myself the AC kicked on. The vents up front were strong enough to push an empty cart a little. I had seen it happen on windy days when the doors opened. The doors were locked now, but I didn't think that through at the time. I wrote down the count for drawer 3 and kept going. I didn't know it then, but the building already had someone in it who knew my routine better than I did. I finished the count at 11:08, everything balanced. I dropped the deposit bag in the safe and spun the dial. Then I started the closing walk, the final one. Lights off, section by section from the back of the store toward the front, ending at the employee door. The back lights were the motion kind, so I didn't touch those. I killed the main banks, garden center first, then plumbing, electrical, paint. The store gets very large when it's dark. You can't see the far wall. Your flashlight only reaches so far, and the emergency lights leave these long gray gaps between aisles. When I shut off the lights in hardware, aisle 9, I heard the sound that I still hear sometimes when it's quiet. It was a soft, even sound, rubber soles on a concrete floor, the slow kind, someone walking without hurry, maybe 2 aisles over, heel then toe, unhurried. I stopped. I said, "Hey, we're closed, you need to head out." My voice sounded too loud. The walking stopped too, not fast like someone caught. It just ended mid-step like a tape paused. I stood in aisle 9 and ran through the list. A customer who hid to shoplift, a coworker who came back for something, Dell maybe who forgot his phone. All of those were possible. All of those would have answered me. None of them would go quiet and still in the dark. I called Dell. He picked up from his couch. He'd been home 20 minutes. He asked if I was okay. I said the motion lights were acting up and I'd see him tomorrow. I don't know why I lied. I think I didn't want to say the real sentence out loud. The real sentence was, someone is in the store with me. Here is the part that took me a long time to understand. I went to the security room to check the cameras. That was the smart move, I thought. 19 feeds on one wall of small screens. I'd watch, find the customer hiding in seasonal, and call the police with a location. Simple. I sat down and looked at the wall of screens. I started counting feeds, the way I count things when I'm nervous. 1, 2, 3. I got to 18 and stopped. There were 18 live feeds. The 19th screen, bottom right, was black. Not static, not a frozen frame, just off. That camera covered the back corner, receiving. The one part of the store I hadn't shut down yet because it was on my way to the exit. I told myself the camera had failed. Cameras fail. But I had walked past that corner 2 hours earlier and the little red light on it was on. I remembered it because I always check it. It's habit. I started watching the 18 working feeds for movement. And this is where it gets hard to describe, so I'll just say it plainly. I watched for a long time and I never once saw a person, no figure in any aisle, no shape crossing a lane, nothing. But while I watched the screens, I kept hearing the floor, the soft rubber steps moving through the store, aisle to aisle. I could hear it through the wall and the open door. It was right there. It was on the floor I was looking at, and it was not on any screen. I want to be honest about what that did to me. It wasn't a scream or a jump. My hands just stopped moving. I sat with the phone in my hand and I could not remember the 3 numbers I was supposed to dial. I knew them. Everyone knows them. I just couldn't reach them for a moment. My mind kept trying to put a body on those screens and there was no body to put there. The steps were specific. I knew the sound of every floor section in that store and I could place exactly where the walking was. It crossed from electrical into the main aisle. It came toward the front, toward the office, toward the small hallway that led to the room I was in. Then I remembered the lights in aisle 11 hours earlier, on when no one was there, and the cart that moved when the doors were locked and the AC wasn't running, and the music cutting out at 9:14. I had explained all of it, every piece, and every explanation was wrong and had been wrong for hours, while I faced shelves and counted drawers and drank cold coffee and felt safe. It had been in the building before we locked the doors. We didn't lock it out. At 10:05, when I pulled that chain across the front doors and felt that little click of safety, I had locked it in with me, and it had simply waited. It waited through the count. It waited while I called Dell. It was in no hurry at all because it knew the doors were chained and it knew there was only one of me. I did the only thing I could think of. I shut the security room door and locked it. There's a deadbolt for when you're handling cash. I turned off the light and I stood against the far wall and I dialed the 3 numbers I'd finally remembered. The dispatcher was calm. She asked my address. I gave the store name and the highway exit. She asked what was happening. I said there was someone in the building who shouldn't be there. She asked if I could see them. I said no. She asked how I knew then. I didn't have a good answer for that. I just said, I can hear them walking. She told me to stay on the line and stay where I was. Officers were 8 minutes out. For about 4 of those minutes there was nothing. No steps, no sound. The hum of the freezer through the wall. My own breathing, which I was trying to keep quiet. I started to believe it had left, or that I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it was a raccoon in the rafters, which is genuinely what I told the dispatcher, because by then I wanted to be wrong more than I'd ever wanted anything. The dispatcher was calm. She asked my address. I gave the store name and the highway exit. She asked what was happening. I said there was someone in the building who shouldn't be there. She asked if I could see them. I said no. She asked how I knew then. I didn't have a good answer for that. I just said, I can hear them walking. She told me to stay on the line and stay where I was. Officers were 8 minutes out. For about 4 of those minutes there was nothing. No steps, no sound. The hum of the freezer through the wall. My own breathing, which I was trying to keep quiet. I started to believe it had left, or that I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it was a raccoon in the rafters, which is genuinely what I told the dispatcher, because by then I wanted to be wrong more than I'd ever wanted anything. I told myself it was over. I leaned my head against the wall and I let my shoulders drop, and I genuinely believed I had panicked over an animal and a glitchy camera. Then the handle on the security room door turned. Slowly, all the way to the stop. It pressed against the deadbolt and held there, the way you'd test a door you already knew was locked. Not a rattle, not force, just a steady, patient turn and then a pause with the handle held down. Whoever it was stood on the other side of that door and waited to see what I would do. I didn't make a sound. I held the phone to my ear and listened to the dispatcher breathe, and I watched the handle slowly return to its resting position. And then I heard the steps move away, unhurried, same as before, heel, then toe, back into the dark store. The police came in through the employee door at 11:46. I gave them the master key. They searched the whole building, every aisle, the rafters, the freezers, the receiving dock. 2 officers, then 4. They found no one. The chain was still across the front doors. The garden gate was padlocked. The dock door was down and locked from inside. The side door I'd badged through was the only way out, and it locks on its own. They told me the building was empty and secure. They were kind about it. One of them said long shifts and old buildings play tricks. He suggested the raccoon thing himself, which made me feel slightly less insane. I let them believe it. I wanted to believe it too. I quit the next week. I told my manager it was the commute. Here is the part I noticed after, the part I keep coming back to. When the officers checked the security room, one of them looked at the wall of screens and asked me casually how many cameras the store had. I said 19. He counted the feeds, the way I had. He said, I've got 19 live here. All 19 screens were on. The bottom right one, receiving, was working again. It had come back on sometime during the search. But that's not the part. The next morning I couldn't sleep, so I called the store and asked the day manager to pull the camera footage from the night before. I told him I wanted to see the raccoon. He humored me. He called me back an hour later. He said the footage was fine, clean, 8 hours of it. He said you could see me on it the whole time, counting drawers, walking the floor, sitting in the security room, standing against the wall with the phone. All of it from every angle on every camera. And then he got quiet, and he said the thing I think about when it's dark and the house is too still. He said on the camera in receiving, the one that had been black, you could see the back corner clearly the entire night. And for the full 8 hours from before we ever locked the doors, there was a man standing in that corner.